The sun was shy on the horizon when the soldiers began their run through the streets saturated with debris. The light captured quick movements of trained troops. In a war where artillery was the most frequent nightmare of the soldier, those men moving through the city clearly became a new threat to the Ukrainian defender. That was a contested area where explosions were the routine of daily life. Artillery was a gear lubricated with blood. Day after day, the cities of the Kremenna-Svartov axis were bombed. The world exploded to prevent the Ukrainian army from passing through the P-66 highway and taking control of the region. However, not every battle could be resolved by pouring hell on the enemies. In that modern war, drones were pure despair flying over the soldiers' heads. Helicopters flew over the trenches, presenting opponents with smoking pieces of the devil's house. However, purely human material was not dispensable in the midst of that horror. The special forces entered the neighborhoods of Novoselivsk. The shy village had no more than 1,000 people in times of peace. Now the main inhabitants were men armed with green helmets of various models. Some had the 6B-47 of the loadout Radnik, others the Tor. It was already an indicative of who were the troops who raised their rifles while looking for protection for the advance. The sound of birds was replaced by the melody of AK-74M as soldiers passed between destroyed buildings. The sun was rehearsing to set, creating a landscape that was a disconnected beauty in the midst of the battle horror. Men moved among bricks of houses that were dreams of civilians who protected themselves from the cold of winter and now were debris that served as a shield for deadly shots. It was difficult to define what was a street, such was the destruction that spread throughout the village. Empty cartridges rose into the air, increasingly filling the ground full of debris. The Special Forces operators were called to the region with the intent of eliminating the last Ukrainian defenses in the village. Russia needed to consolidate its positions, knowing that the Ukrainian 92nd Mechanized Brigade was trying to maintain defense. The strategy was an operation that surrounded the last traces of resistance that tank bombardment had not resolved. The enemy resisted bravely with the advantage of defending the location, already prepared for ambushes. However, not everyone was capable of positioning themselves correctly in defense, ending up falling into the siege of experienced troops. They were probably too accustomed to the mobilized advancing with their head in the clouds. But that day they faced men hardened by wars in Chechnya, Syria, Georgia, or at least since the beginning of the special operation in Ukraine. The soldiers knew they had cornered the Ukrainian. He had nowhere to retreat, leaving him with a desperate fight to eliminate as many Russians as possible. An RPG was prepared and launched in the direction of the enemy, but it did not have the expected effect, besides probably shaking the man to the bones. The pressure continued. One of the soldiers removed the GM-94 to start a succession of shots to end the lonely resistance of the Ukrainian. The VGM-93.100 came out of the barrel to explode just over 10 meters away, the minimum safe firing distance for this thermobaric ammunition. The potential to penetrate up to 8 millimeters of steel or inside a wall was essential to remove all the opponent's protection. It was another insufficient shot to take the man's life who held 3 operators under pressure. They needed to finish the job quickly because there were other sectors of the village to be cleaned. Dax began firing again towards the man, the 3 weapons sang in synchrony. adding more and more pressure on the enemy. The Russians looked around, fearing that someone might appear to help the cornered man. Finally, something gave in the enemy's mind, something that only the pressure of war and the breath of death on the neck can explain. The soldier ran towards the only available exit at a moment when only one of the AK-74s was pointing in his direction. The 5.45 shots followed fiercely towards the body, moving in desperation. There were several, however, to the stunned looks of the Russians, he passed. They were left to reload and continue shooting without knowing if the man had fallen further ahead. In another area, men began a grenade launcher duel. One of the operators raised the RPG-27 to make the air tremble and what was left of the Ukrainian protections crumble. The response was very quick. It was enough to turn a corner and a distraction for revenge to turn into a ball of fire around one of the operators. Axe and Kunz fell to the ground, but the men couldn't stop. Staying in place would be the end. They fired while running as they saw darkness approaching the battlefield. Each house was a new surprise. Enemies emerged from the dense shadows of the remaining buildings, shooting and retreating as soon as their position was compromised. Control was necessary, maintaining training, especially when someone became careless, their mind taken over by the chaos of battle and passing in front of a colleague in the middle of the fire. Calm was needed, and knowing when to take turns. Some shot, suppressed, then reloaded. The next one took their position. They could never let their opponents take superiority in the fire. They tried to surround the Ukrainians everywhere. They threw grenades and maintained pressure from different positions. In the midst of the gunfire, after hours of combat, the soldier looked at the setting sun. Darkness was thickening over all of them in a way that gave hands to the shadows inside their souls. He breathed deeply not to be taken by anguish in the midst of battle. These were the last rays of the sun. Now the sparks of gunfire were seen at night. The traces of violence were no longer the wreckage but the sudden light tones that announced themselves in the night. The battle was coming down to a single position. The nightfall generated a need to consummate victory as if the fading rays of light were the hourglass of death. They exchanged positions with increasing speed, sometimes firing in pairs. The pride of the Russians came during the night. The shots became increasingly silent. Little was heard beyond distant explosions. Victory had finally come. The relief in the hearts of the Russians was not total because they knew that darkness hid enemies lurking.